"Get out of the front row. You don't belong there anymore." Those were the first words my daughter-in-law spoke to me at my wife's funeral. Not a whisper, not a suggestion. A command delivered while her manicured fingers dug into my elbow and pulled me away from the mahogany coffin where Margaret lay in eternal silence. I stumbled. Not because I was weak, though, at 70. My knees aren't what they used to be, but because I couldn't process what was happening. 44 years of marriage. 44 years of standing beside this woman through every triumph and failure. And now at her funeral, I was being removed from the front row, like an usher clearing a seat for someone more important. Vanessa guided me to the third pew, past the business executives in their Italian suits, past the society women dabbing their eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs, past everyone who had come to mourn the great Margaret Ward. My son Derek didn't even turn around. He stood at the altar, reviewing his eulogy notes as if nothing had happened. As if his father being publicly demoted at his mother's funeral was simply the natural order of things. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that Margaret had already written the ending to this story. They just hadn't read it yet. St. Catherine's Church had never felt so cold. The Gothic architecture that Margaret had always admired, the vaulted ceilings, the stained glass windows depicting saints in their suffering, now felt like a mausoleum designed specifically for my humiliation. 200 guests filled the pews. Politicians, business partners, charity board members, the kind of people who measured grief in networking opportunities. I scanned the room from my exile in the third row. Derek stood at the front, broad-shouldered in his charcoal Armani suit, every inch the successful executive. At 42, he had his mother's sharp jawline and sharper ambition. Beside him, Vanessa had positioned herself next to the mayor's wife, already working the room, even as the priest prepared to speak. She wore a black Chanel dress that cost more than my first car pearl earrings, that caught the candlelight and an expression of carefully manufactured sorrow. My daughter Claire sat in the second row, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. At 38, she had become a stranger to me, someone who answered phone calls with one-word responses and visited only on holidays, and even then, only when her mother insisted. Today, she had chosen her side, the side with the money, the side that didn't include me. The service began, and I tried to focus on the priest's words. But my attention kept drifting to the whispers around me. "That's the husband, isn't it? I didn't even know she was married. He looks ordinary." Ordinary. After 44 years of holding this family together, I was a footnote, a minor character in Margaret's epic story. The man who cooked, cleaned, raised children, balanced checkbooks, and stood in the shadows while his wife built an empire. I had accepted that role willingly, even proudly. Someone had to be the foundation while she became the tower. But I never expected to be erased. Derek approached the podium for his eulogy. He gripped the edges with both hands, surveyed the crowd like a CEO addressing shareholders, and began. "My mother was a visionary." The words rolled out with practiced precision. He spoke of Margaret's rise from a small real estate office to a commercial property empire worth $12 million. He listed her achievements: 15 major developments, 3 charity foundations, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Connecticut Business Council. He thanked her mentors, her partners, her board members. He acknowledged her dedication, her brilliance, her relentless drive. I counted. 8 minutes of speech. 47 people thanked by name. My name not once. Not when he spoke of family support. Not when he mentioned sacrifice. Not when he described the woman who balanced it all with grace. I had made every meal she ate for 4 decades. I had raised both children while she worked 18-hour days. I had held her hand through 2 miscarriages, a cancer scare, and a bankruptcy that nearly destroyed us. Erased, all of it, in 8 minutes. Margaret Ward was not just a businesswoman, Derek concluded. She was a force of nature, and her legacy will endure forever. Applause. Actual applause at a funeral. Margaret would have hated it. She found public displays of emotion gauche. But Derek didn't know that. He didn't know his mother at all, only the version she presented in boardrooms. The service moved to the cemetery. Gray clouds hung low over the manicured grounds, threatening rain that never came. The coffin was lowered into the earth, with mechanical precision ropes creaking, machinery humming. Derek threw the first rose-white long-stemmed expensive. Margaret hated white roses. She said they looked like surrender. When my turn came, I threw a yellow daisy, her actual favorite. The flower she picked on our first date pressed between the pages of a book she kept in her nightstand drawer for 44 years. Vanessa noticed. She smirked. How quaint. As the crowd dispersed, I moved to say goodbye to departing guests, an automatic gesture, the host's instinct, even at his own wife's funeral. That's when I heard them. Derek, Vanessa, and Claire huddled near a mausoleum, voices low but not low enough. The house alone is worth $2.5 million, Derek's voice. We list it next month. The market's hot. What about him, Vanessa? I knew without looking that she was gesturing toward me. There are facilities. Claire, my own daughter. Nice ones, with activities. He can't stay in that house alone, Vanessa again. It's too much space for one person, and honestly, it's weird. An old man rattling around in a mansion. I stopped walking. My feet wouldn't move. Then Vanessa said the words that changed everything. She didn't lower her voice, didn't even try to hide it. She said them clearly, loudly, as if I weren't standing 20 feet away, as if I were already gone. Let's be honest. He was never really part of this family. He was just the help. Derek didn't correct her. Claire looked away. And I stood there in my one good suit at my wife's funeral and felt every word slice through me like broken glass. The help. 44 years, 2 children, countless sacrifices. And to them, I was the help. I drove home alone. My old Honda Civic rattled along familiar streets, past buildings Margaret had developed, past the park where I had taught Derek to ride a bike, past the coffee shop where Claire used to meet me on Sunday mornings before she decided I wasn't worth her time. The house loomed at the end of Oak Street. Victorian, wraparound porch, rose garden I had planted with my own hands. Margaret had bought it when Derek was 3. I had made it a home. Now it felt like a museum. Beautiful, cold, and full of things that didn't belong to me anymore. On the kitchen counter where I had left it 3 days ago sat a sealed envelope. Margaret's handwriting shaky from illness, but unmistakable. For Elias. Open after the reading. I didn't open it. Not yet. I wasn't ready. 3 days later, I sat in a lawyer's office and learned exactly how much 44 years of devotion was worth. $1,000. But that was only page 1. And my wife, God bless her calculating heart, had written a second page. One that would change everything. The law offices of Price & Associates occupied the 14th floor of a mirrored building downtown. The kind of building that reflects the sky and makes you feel small just standing in its shadow. I arrived 15 minutes early, as I had done for everything my entire life. Punctuality was one of the few things my father taught me before he died. A man who respects himself makes no one wait. The receptionist was young, hair too straight to be natural, smile too practiced to be genuine. She offered me coffee. I accepted, but when she handed me the cup, my hands trembled so badly that the liquid sloshed onto the saucer. I set it down on the glass table and pretended to read a magazine I had no interest in. The waiting room was designed to intimidate. Leather chairs that squeaked when you shifted. Framed photographs of lawyers shaking hands with governors, CEOs, senators. Margaret belonged in those photographs. I belonged in the kitchen preparing meals for the people in them. The envelope was still in my jacket pocket. Open after the reading. I had carried it for 3 days, afraid to break the seal. Afraid of what Margaret's final words might say. afraid they would confirm what I already suspected, that even at the end, I was an afterthought. Derek arrived 20 minutes late. He entered the waiting room like a conquering general, shoulders squared, Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. Vanessa trailed behind him, balancing on gold stilettos, oversized sunglasses, still perched on her face, despite the air-conditioned interior. Claire came last, clutching her designer purse like a shield, eyes fixed on her phone. None of them greeted me. Vanessa air-kissed the receptionist and asked for sparkling water. Derek checked his Rolex and sighed loudly at the inconvenience of having to be here at all. Claire found a seat as far from me as possible and continued scrolling. Raymond Price appeared in the doorway, mid-60s, silver hair combed back with precision glasses that made his eyes look larger than they were. He carried a worn brown folder, Margaret's entire life, reduced to paper and legal jargon. "Let's begin," he said, and led us to the conference room. The table was mahogany polished to a mirror's shine. 10 leather chairs surrounded it, though only 5 of us sat down. The windows offered a panoramic view of the city Margaret had helped build. Somewhere out there, buildings bore her name, developments she had willed into existence through sheer force of ambition. I sat at the far end, hands folded on my synthetic leather briefcase. Derek positioned himself at the head of the table as if he were the executor rather than a beneficiary. Vanessa sat beside him, finally removing her sunglasses to reveal eyes already calculating the value of everything in the room. Claire took the corner seat, disengaged, waiting for the numbers. Price opened the folder with slow, deliberate movements. He cleared his throat. The last will and testament of Margaret Ellen Ward, dated March 3rd of this year, 3 months before her passing. 3 months. Margaret had changed her will 3 months before she died. She had known the cancer was terminal by then. She had known her time was limited. And in those final months, she had made decisions. To various charitable organizations designated in Schedule A, Price continued, I bequeath the sum of $500,000 to be distributed according to my specific instructions. Derek drummed his fingers on the table, impatient, hungry. Get to the good part, Vanessa whispered, not bothering to hide her voice. Price ignored her. He adjusted his glasses and continued reading. To my beloved husband, Elias Ward, I leave the sum of $1,000 deposited in a designated checking account. Additionally, I grant him the right to reside in the family home located at 742 Oak Street for a period not to exceed 6 months following my death. The world stopped. $1,000. 6 months. Then, what? The street Derek's laughter exploded across the conference room like a gunshot. He slapped the table with his palm, the sound sharp and cruel. $1,000. He turned to me, eyes gleaming with something between triumph and contempt. Dad, that doesn't even cover Vanessa's monthly spa budget. What the hell did you do to Mom for her to leave you this? Vanessa giggled, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. I guess we know what 44 years of service is worth. Claire smirked, but said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was endorsement enough. I sat frozen. My hands gripped the armrests so tightly my knuckles went white. Every word of their laughter penetrated my skin like shards of broken glass. 44 years. Every meal I had cooked, every bill I had paid, every night I had spent alone while Margaret worked late, every sacrifice I had made so she could build her empire. $1,000. I had learned long ago that my tears were invisible too. So I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't move. I just sat there absorbing the humiliation, like I had absorbed everything else in my marriage, silently, completely, without complaint. Price continued reading as if the circus around him wasn't happening. To my son, Derek Ward, I leave the entirety of Ward Commercial Properties, including all business holdings, investment portfolios, commercial real estate assets, and vehicles. The estimated total value of these assets is $8 million. Derek pumped his fist. Vanessa shrieked with joy and threw her arms around his neck. They kissed right there in front of the lawyer, in front of me, celebrating as if they had won the lottery, rather than inherited a dead woman's legacy. To my daughter, Claire Ward, I leave my investment accounts, vacation properties, and art collection. The estimated total value is $4 million. When Claire finally looked up from her phone, a smile spread across her face, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her all day. $4 million had accomplished what I could not, making my daughter acknowledge my existence even peripherally. Price closed the folder slowly. He removed his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth from his pocket. His movements were precise, unhurried, as if he were buying time. "That concludes the reading of the primary will," he said. His eyes met mine across the table. Something passed between us, a message I couldn't decode. Pity, no. Something else. Anticipation, maybe. Derek was already on his phone texting someone about the inheritance. Vanessa was examining her nails, already planning shopping sprees. Claire had returned to scrolling. I stood slowly, collected my briefcase, and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one said goodbye. I was simply furniture being removed from a room. But in the hallway, footsteps echoed behind me. Raymond Price. "Mr. Ward?" His voice was low, urgent. "Wait." I turned. He glanced back at the conference room door, then stepped closer. "Do not sign anything." He pressed a business card into my hand. "Nothing. Do you understand? Not a single document they put in front of you." "Why?" My voice came out hoarse. "What is there left to sign?" Price's jaw tightened. "Come see me privately. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Alone." "I don't understand." He leaned closer, and for a moment, his professional mask slipped. I saw something underneath a man who knew more than he was saying. "Your wife was a very thorough woman, Mr. Ward. Trust me." Before I could respond, he turned and walked back toward the conference room. I stood in the hallway staring at the business card, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the doors close on the worst day of my life. But as the elevator descended, one thought kept circling in my mind. Margaret was thorough. She planned everything. She never made a move without calculating 3 steps ahead. So why would she leave me with nothing, unless nothing wasn't the whole story? I drove home that night without turning on the radio. The silence felt appropriate. I sat in the living room chair Margaret had bought for my 50th birthday, moss green velvet, worn at the arms, and watched the shadows move across the ceiling until dawn. $1,000 and a lawyer who told me to trust him. I didn't understand yet, but I would. 1 week after the will reading, the invasion began. I was standing in the kitchen at 9:47 in the morning, pouring my second cup of coffee, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Since Margaret's death, no one had come to check on me. No casseroles from neighbors. No sympathy cards. Just silence and empty rooms. I opened the door and found Vanessa standing on my porch with a woman I didn't recognize. The stranger wore a navy blazer, carried a leather clipboard, and had the kind of aggressive smile that salespeople use when they smell commission. "Hi, Dad." Vanessa's voice was bright, performative. "This is Jennifer from Coldwell Banker. We're just going to take some measurements." Before I could respond, Jennifer brushed past me into the foyer. She was already photographing the crown molding the original hardwood floors, the chandelier that Margaret and I had picked out together 30 years ago. "Original details," Jennifer exclaimed, her phone clicking rapidly. "Victorian charm with modern updates. This will sell fast." Vanessa followed her inside heels, clicking against the wood floors that I had refinished by hand the summer Derek turned 10. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait to be invited. She walked through my home like she already owned it. "Measurements for what?" I asked, still standing at the open door. Vanessa waved her hand dismissively, not bothering to look at me. "The listing, Dad. We talked about this." "We didn't talk about anything. Derek handled it." Jennifer was already moving through the living room, opening closets, photographing windows. She touched Margaret's antique writing desk, ran her fingers along the silk curtains, made notes in her leather folder. Every click of her camera felt like a small theft. 20 minutes later, Derek's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. He emerged with a folder of his own, thick, official-looking, stuffed with papers. His expression was the carefully neutral mask of a man about to deliver bad news. He didn't consider bad at all. "Dad?" He didn't greet me with a hug or a handshake, just my name spoken like a summons. "Sit down. We need to discuss logistics." I remained standing, a small defiance but mine. Derek spread his papers across the dining room table, Margaret's table where we had eaten Christmas dinners for 4 decades. Timeline charts, property valuations, market analysis, a neat corporate presentation for the dismantling of my life. "We're looking at listing in 6 weeks, he explained, pointing to dates circled in red. "The market is hot right now. Jennifer thinks we can close in 90 days. "What about me?" The question hung in the air. Derek glanced at Vanessa. Something passed between them, a rehearsed exchange. Vanessa reached into her designer bag and pulled out a glossy brochure. On the cover, elderly people sat in wheelchairs, smiling vacant smiles surrounded by nurses in pastel scrubs. Sunset Pines Senior Living was printed across the top in cheerful yellow letters. "It's lovely, Dad." Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "They have a recreation room, arts and crafts, a garden. You like gardens, don't you?" I took the brochure, flipped through pages of staged photographs. Happy seniors playing bingo, group exercise classes, a dining hall with plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting. At the bottom of the last page in small print, monthly rate starting at $6,500. My $1,000 inheritance wouldn't cover 2 weeks. "How am I supposed to afford this?" Derek didn't look up from his papers. "We'll work something out. Maybe a small monthly allowance." The front door opened again. Claire walked in late, as always, absorbed in her phone. She moved to Derek's side, glanced at the papers spread across the table, and signed her name where he pointed without reading a single word. "What is she signing?" I asked. "Just authorization for the property assessment." Derek's tone was impatient. "Nothing you need to worry about." Claire still hadn't acknowledged me. My own daughter standing 5 feet away, and she couldn't even meet my eyes. I looked at the brochure in my hands, at the timeline on the table, at the realtors still photographing rooms I had lived in for 40 years. Something cold settled in my stomach. "This is my home," I said. "Margaret and I built this together." Vanessa stopped pretending to be nice. The sweet mask dropped away, and underneath was something harder, colder. "Built this together." She stepped closer, arms crossed, chin raised. "You held a clipboard while she built an empire. I raised 2 children in this house. I cooked every meal. I paid every bill. You stayed out of the way." She cut me off. "That's what you did. You cooked. You cleaned. You existed in the background." "Vanessa." "Let's be honest, Dad." She said the word like it was an insult. "You're not even her real family. You were never her partner. You were never her equal." She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive, aggressive. "You were the help, and the help doesn't get to keep the mansion." Derek shuffled his papers, avoiding my eyes. Claire examined her fingernails. Neither of them said a word in my defense. I stood there absorbing the blow when something on the table caught my attention. A document peeking out from Derek's folder. A header I recognized. "What is that?" I reached for it before he could stop me. The paper was heavy official. Sunset Pines Senior Living. Reservation confirmation. My eyes found the date. March 15th, 1 month before Margaret died. "You contacted them in March?" My voice came out strange, distant. "Your mother was still alive in March." Derek's face went pale for a fraction of a second. Vanessa's jaw tightened. "We were just planning ahead," she said quickly. "Being responsible." planning ahead. I stared at the date. She was still in the hospital, still fighting. And you were booking my room at a nursing home. Silence. They had been circling before she was even cold. Before she took her last breath, they were planning my exile. Her illness wasn't a tragedy to them. It was an opportunity. "Dad, don't be dramatic," Claire said her first words to me all day. "It's just logistics." Just logistics. 44 years of marriage. 44 years of partnership. Just logistics. Derek gathered his papers with quick, efficient movements. The businessman was back, the mask firmly in place. "Look, Dad. This is happening. The house is part of Mom's estate. You have 6 months, according to the will, but we'd prefer you out in 60 days. It's easier for everyone. And if I say no..." He paused at the door. When he turned back, his expression was something I had never seen before. Not anger, not frustration, contempt. "We have lawyers, Dad, good ones. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." They left. All of them. The realtor packed up her camera and drove away. Vanessa's heels clicked down the front steps. Derek's Mercedes disappeared around the corner. I stood in the foyer of my own home, surrounded by ghosts of 40 years, holding a nursing home brochure in one hand and a reservation confirmation dated before my wife was even dead. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize at first. Gloria Nguyen, the neighbor from 3 houses down, retired judge. We had exchanged pleasantries over the fence for years, but never more than that. "Elias, I saw those people leaving your house. The woman with the clipboard. Are you all right?" I stared at the message. The first person to ask me that since Margaret's funeral. Another buzz. "Come over for dinner tonight. We need to talk. There's something I should have told you weeks ago. Something Margaret asked me to tell you when the time was right." I looked at the envelope still sitting on the kitchen counter. Margaret's handwriting. "Open after the reading." Maybe it was time. Maybe my wife had left me more than $1,000 after all. Gloria Nguyen's house smelled like home-cooked food and fresh jasmine. I walked the 3 houses down at exactly 6:30, passing the "Coming Soon" sign that Jennifer had already planted in my front yard. I hadn't authorized it. No one had asked. But there it was, announcing to the neighborhood that my life was for sale. Gloria opened the door before I could knock. She had been watching for me. At 72, she carried herself like a woman who had spent decades commanding courtrooms. Silver hair cut short and practical. Red-framed glasses that magnified sharp, intelligent eyes. Posture that defied gravity and age. She had been a family court judge for 35 years before retiring. We had exchanged pleasantries over the fence for almost a decade, but never anything deeper. Until now. "Come in, Elias." Her voice was warm but urgent. "Dinner's ready. We have a lot to discuss." The contrast hit me immediately. Her kitchen was alive, steam rising from a pot of Vietnamese pho, the rich aroma of beef broth and star anise filling the air. Photographs of grandchildren covered every surface. Laughter seemed embedded in the walls themselves. My house had become a tomb. Hers was still living. She set a bowl in front of me without asking if I was hungry. The first real meal I had eaten since Margaret's funeral. I hadn't realized how much I had been forgetting to feed myself. Gloria sat across from me, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, watching me eat. She didn't rush, didn't push. Just waited until I was ready. "I saw everything today," she finally said. "The woman with the clipboard. Your son's car, the sign in your yard." I set down my spoon. "They're selling the house." I gathered. She removed her glasses, cleaned them with the hem of her blouse, a habit I would come to recognize as her thinking gesture. "And I heard Vanessa's voice through your window. Sound carries on quiet streets." My face burned with shame. "You heard the help." Gloria's voice was flat. "That's what she called you." I stared at my soup. Maybe she's right. Maybe I was just Stop. Her hand came down on the table firm, but not angry. Right there. Stop. I looked up. I was a family court judge for 35 years, Elias. I've seen every kind of elder abuse there is: financial, emotional, psychological, coercion, manipulation. She leaned forward. What I saw today, what I heard through that window, that's textbook. They're my children. That doesn't give them the right to erase you. Her eyes were fierce behind those red frames. They're not grieving, Elias. They're acquiring. There's a difference. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, placed it on the table between us. I recorded what I could hear. Old habit from the bench, always document. She paused. Vanessa's voice is clear enough. The help. The mansion. All of it. I stared at the phone. Evidence. She had been gathering evidence. Why? I asked. Why would you do that? Gloria's expression softened. For the first time, she looked not like a judge, but like a friend. Because Margaret asked me to. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. She came to see me, Gloria continued. 2 months before she died. She was weak from the chemo, could barely walk up my front steps, but her mind was sharp as ever. I couldn't speak. My wife had been dying, and instead of spending her final weeks resting, she had been visiting neighbors, making plans. She sat right where you're sitting now. Gloria's voice dropped, and she asked me about behavior clauses in wills, conditional inheritance. She wanted to know if it was legal to disinherit children based on how they treat the surviving spouse. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my ears. What did you tell her? I told her the truth. It's not only legal, it's been upheld in Connecticut courts multiple times. The key is documentation. Proof of specific behavior within a specified time frame. Gloria reached across the table and took my hand. She smiled when I told her that. That Margaret smile, the one she used when she was closing a deal. And she said something I'll never forget. What? She said, my children think they're smarter than me. They've been circling for months, waiting for me to die. But they forgot who taught them everything they know about strategy. Gloria squeezed my fingers. And then she said, I'm going to give Elias the one thing I never gave him while I was alive. The power to defend himself. Tears came. I couldn't stop them. After days of numbness, of absorbing blow after blow, without breaking the dam, finally cracked. Margaret had seen me. At the end, she had finally seen me. There's more, Gloria said gently. She left you something. I remembered the envelope. Still in my jacket pocket. Still sealed. With trembling hands, I pulled it out. Margaret's handwriting on the front, shaky from illness, but unmistakably hers. For Elias, open after the reading. I broke the seal. Inside was a single page handwritten. I read it aloud, my voice cracking. My dearest Elias, if you're reading this, the first act is over. They showed you who they are. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive. I was too busy building an empire to see the monsters growing in my own house. But I see them now. And I've made arrangements. Trust Raymond Price. He has the second page. 30 days, Elias. Give them 30 days to prove me wrong. I hope they do. But I know they won't. For the first time in our marriage, I'm asking you to be patient for yourself, not for me. I love you. I always did. I just forgot to say it. The words blurred. Tears were falling onto the paper now, smudging the ink. 30 days, I whispered. She kept saying that before she died. The memory came flooding back. 3 weeks before the end. The hospital room machines beeping their steady rhythm. Margaret drifting in and out of consciousness. I had been holding her hand when her eyes suddenly opened, clear-focused. "I've taken care of everything, Elias." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Just be patient. 30 days. I thought she was confused. The medication talking. "Promise me you won't give up," she said. "Promise me you'll finally fight for yourself." "I promise." I had said not understanding. Now I understood. Every word, every pause, every breath she had spent on those final instructions. Gloria was watching me, her own eyes glistening. "She knew, I said. "She planned. She protected me from beyond the grave." Margaret was always 3 steps ahead of everyone. Gloria squeezed my hand. "You need to see Raymond Price. Tomorrow. If she set up what I think she set up, your children have already walked into a trap of their own making." She paused. "And they don't even know the door is closing." I looked at the letter in my hands, at Gloria's steady gaze, at the phone on the table with its recorded evidence. Something shifted inside me. The defeated man who had walked through her door an hour ago was not the man sitting here now. "I've been invisible for 44 years, I said slowly. "Because I chose to be. Because I thought that was what a good husband, a good father should do." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in my pocket. Maybe it's time to be seen. Gloria smiled, the first real smile I had seen in weeks that wasn't hiding cruelty underneath. "Margaret once told me you were the strongest person she knew." I asked her why. She said, "Because he never breaks. He just bends until the storm passes." She stood, began clearing the table. "The storm is here, Elias. It's time to stop bending." I walked home in the dark, past the coming soon sign, past the house they wanted to steal from me. Tomorrow I would see Raymond Price. Tomorrow I would learn what my wife had truly left me. And for the first time in 44 years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The same building, the same 14th floor, the same glass walls reflecting the city skyline. But when I walked into Price & Associates the second time, everything was different. I was different. Margaret's letter was in my breast pocket, pressed against my heart like armor. Gloria's words echoed in my mind. "The storm is here. It's time to stop bending." The receptionist offered me coffee again. This time my hands didn't shake. Raymond Price came to the waiting room personally. He didn't send an assistant, didn't make me wait. He appeared in the doorway at exactly 9:00 a.m., jacket already off tie, slightly loosened, the posture of a man who had been working since dawn. "Mr. Ward." "Oh, yeah." He shook my hand with both of his. "Thank you for coming. We have much to discuss." He led me not to the conference room, where my life had been dismantled, but to his private office. Smaller, more intimate, lined with law books and framed degrees. He closed the door behind us, locked it, then checked that the blinds were fully drawn. The secrecy itself was a message. "Your wife," he began, settling into his chair, "was the most formidable woman I have ever represented. In 30 years of estate law, I have never encountered anyone with her precision, her foresight, her absolute commitment to protecting what mattered to her." He paused, studying my face. "And in her final months, she became something else entirely." He opened a locked drawer in his desk and withdrew a thick folder. The kind of folder that holds secrets. The kind that changes lives. Margaret hired a private investigator 6 months before her death. The target of the investigation was not a business competitor, not a rival developer. He slid the folder across the desk. The target was her own children. My stomach dropped. Why? She suspected financial irregularities, specifically in Derek's division of the company. I opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, contracts, corporate filings, pages and pages of numbers and signatures that meant nothing to me individually, but together painted a picture of systematic betrayal. "Your son has been embezzling from Ward commercial properties for at least 2 years. Price's voice was clinical precise. "Shell companies, phantom vendors, inflated invoices. He would approve payments to contractors who didn't exist, then funnel the money into offshore accounts. I turned page after page, highlighted transactions, circled amounts, Margaret's handwriting in the margins, making notes. How much? $500,000 that we've documented. 500,000. My son had been stealing from his dying mother while she was still alive, while she was fighting for every breath. Did she confront him? No. Price leaned back. She did something smarter. She let him keep digging his own grave. And Claire, his expression hardened. Your daughter wasn't directly involved in the theft, but she knew. Derek bought her silence with gifts, jewelry trips, a new car. She accepted them without asking questions. I closed the folder. I couldn't look at any more. My children, I said quietly. Both of them. Both of them. The silence stretched. Then Price reached into the drawer again and withdrew a sealed envelope. I recognized the notary stamp, the official signatures. This was the document he had kept hidden during the first reading. This is page 2 of your wife's will. He placed it on the desk between us. It could only be revealed under specific conditions, conditions that have now been met. He broke the seal and unfolded the document. His voice took on the formal cadence of a legal reading. Additional clause to the last will and testament of Margaret Ellen Ward. I established the following behavioral contingency. If within 30 days following my death, my children, Derek Ward and/or Claire Ward, demonstrate behavior toward my husband Elias that constitutes abuse, coercion, disrespect, or any attempt to deprive him of his dignity or legal rights. He looked up at me. The inheritance designated to them shall be revoked in its entirety and transferred completely to Elias Ward. The words hung in the air. I couldn't breathe. The entire inheritance, everything, Derek's $8 million, Claire's $4 million, all $12 million would transfer to you, and they would receive $1,000 each. Price allowed himself a small, grim smile. The same amount they laughed at you for receiving. The same respect they showed their father. I stood up, walked to the window. The city spread out below me, Margaret City in so many ways. The buildings she had developed. The skyline she had shaped. What qualifies as triggering behavior? I asked without turning around. The clause is specific. Verbal abuse or humiliation. Attempts to coerce the signing of legal documents. Forced changes in living arrangements. Any action designed to diminish your legal standing or personal dignity. All of it must be documented video, audio, or credible witness testimony. I turned back to face him. And you've been documenting? It wasn't a question. Price opened his laptop. Your wife installed security cameras 3 months before her death. Hidden in the living room lamp. The kitchen smoke detector. The foyer clock. Connected to a secure server that only I can access. He pressed a key. The screen flickered to life. There I was, in high definition. The first will reading. Derek's laughter exploding across the conference room. Vanessa's voice. I guess we know what 44 years of service is worth. Another clip. My living room. Vanessa's face twisted with contempt. You were just the help. Another. Derek with the realtor. The market is hot. We list next month. Everything has been recorded, Price said. Every interaction, every insult, every threat. I stared at the screen, watching myself be humiliated, watching my children reveal who they truly were when they thought no one was keeping score. How many days have passed? Price checked his calendar. 12. So, 18 remain. 18 days. He wrote the number on a notepad and slid it toward me. 18 days for your children to either prove their mother wrong or prove her right. I picked up the paper, folded it carefully, placed it in my pocket next to Margaret's letter. What do I do? Nothing. Price closed the laptop. That's the hardest part. You do nothing. You don't confront them. You don't reveal what you know. You let them continue being exactly who they are. Why? Because if they suspect the trap, they'll change their behavior. 30 days of good acting, and they keep everything. They must believe they've already won. He walked around the desk, and put a hand on my shoulder. Can you hold on for 18 more days, Mr. Ward? I thought about the garage cot they would eventually force me to sleep on, the documents they would try to make me sign, the humiliations still to come. Then I thought about Margaret, lying in that hospital bed, barely able to breathe, still fighting for me, still protecting me, still believing I was worth saving. I held on for 44 years, I said. 18 days is nothing. Price nodded. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, there's one more thing. Margaret asked me to tell you this personally. She said writing it wasn't enough. I waited. She said, tell Elias I'm sorry it took me dying to see what was right in front of me. Tell him he was never invisible to me. I was just too busy to look. Tell him this is my apology and my gift. Tell him to finally put himself first, just this once. I couldn't speak. The tears came again, not of grief this time, but of something else. Gratitude, validation. Love arriving too late, but arriving nonetheless. She always did give the best gifts, I finally managed. Price smiled sadly. Yes, she did. I left his office with a folder full of evidence, a number written on paper, and a heart full of something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope, not anger, purpose. 18 days. My children had 18 days to prove their mother wrong. I already knew they wouldn't, but I would give them the chance anyway. That's what a father does. The trucks arrived at 8 in the morning. I was still in bed when I heard them, diesel engines rumbling doors, slamming voices barking instructions. I pulled back the curtain and saw 2 white vans parked in my driveway, their sides emblazoned with gold lettering. Hartford Estate Appraisals Auction and Liquidation Services. Liquidation. They weren't just selling. They were dismantling. 4 men in matching polo shirts emerged from the vans carrying clipboards, cameras, and rolling carts stacked with bubble wrap and numbered stickers. They moved with the efficiency of people who did this for a living, cataloging dead people's belongings, reducing lifetimes to line items. Derek's Mercedes pulled in behind them. He stepped out in a cashmere sweater and pressed slacks, looking like he was heading to brunch rather than gutting his father's home. Vanessa emerged from the passenger side, clutching her leather portfolio, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Neither of them knocked. Derek used his key, the one I had given him years ago, for emergencies. This wasn't an emergency. This was an invasion. I met them in the foyer, still wearing my robe. What is this? Morning, Dad. Derek's voice was bright, dismissive. The appraisal team is here. Try to stay out of their way. He brushed past me. Vanessa followed, already directing the men toward the living room. Start with the antiques. The Victorian pieces should be photographed individually. I stood in my own home in my own foyer and watched strangers begin to dismantle my life. The first appraiser stopped in front of the grandfather clock in the hallway. He ran his fingers along the mahogany case, examined the brass pendulum, made notes on his clipboard. Howard Miller, 1952. Original movement. Excellent condition. He pulled a yellow sticker from his roll and pressed it onto the glass face. Ansage 1. That clock had belonged to my father. He bought it the year I was born, wound it every Sunday morning while listening to baseball on the radio. When he died, my mother gave it to me. I had wound it every Sunday since 50 years of Sundays, each turn of the key a small prayer to his memory. Estimated value $4,500. $4,500. That was what my father's memory was worth to them. The second appraiser was already in the dining room, opening the china cabinet with white-gloved hands. My mother's wedding china, the set she had carried from Poland after the war, wrapped in newspaper and hidden in a suitcase. Each piece was hand-painted with blue flowers. She used to say they reminded her of the gardens her mother tended before everything was taken away. The appraiser held a plate up to the light. Rosenthal, 1947, complete 12-piece set. He photographed it from multiple angles. Estimated value $3,200. Yellow sticker. There is it on two. I followed them through the house like a ghost, watching as they tagged and priced everything I had ever loved. My father's pocket watch, $800. My grandmother's silver tea set, $1,500. The crystal vase Margaret and I bought on our honeymoon in Venice, $600. Each sticker was a small death, each number an erasure. By noon, they had reached the living room. The lead appraiser, a gray-haired man with a mustache and an air of professional detachment, stopped in front of the fireplace. Above the mantel hung an oil painting of the Connecticut coastline, waves crashing against rocks, a lighthouse in the distance, golden light spilling across the water. Margaret had commissioned it for our 25th anniversary. We had driven to the artist's studio together, watched him work over 3 weekends, brought him coffee and sandwiches while he painted. It was the only piece of art Margaret had ever chosen for sentiment rather than investment value. Original oil, local artist, significant provenance. The appraiser leaned in, examining the brushwork. I'd estimate $8,000 to $12,000 at auction. Vanessa appeared at my shoulder. Her eyes lit up when she saw the painting. Oh, this is gorgeous. She tilted her head, calculating. This would be perfect in our beach house. The colors would match the guest room. She snapped her fingers at the appraiser. Don't tag this one. I'm keeping it. Before I could speak, she was reaching for the frame, preparing to lift it off the wall. That painting stays. My voice surprised me. It came out firm, clear, louder than I had spoken in weeks. Vanessa froze, hands still raised. She turned to look at me as if a piece of furniture had suddenly started talking. Excuse me. Margaret commissioned that for our anniversary. It stays. Her smile curdled. Everything in this house is part of the estate, Dad, which means it belongs to Derek and Claire now. She paused, letting the words sink in. Which means it belongs to us. The will says I have 6 months in this house. It doesn't say you can strip it bare while I'm still living here. The appraisers had stopped working. Everyone was staring. Derek walked over, placing a hand on Vanessa's shoulder in a gesture meant to look calming, but was really about control. Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's just a painting, he added. To you. I met his eyes. To me, it's the last thing your mother ever gave me. Something flickered across his face, surprise, guilt. It was gone too quickly to identify. I turned to look for Claire. She had been here all along, I realized, standing in the doorway watching the confrontation unfold. My daughter, who I had taught to ride a bike in this very living room, who had cried for hours when she was 7 because she broke her grandmother's teacup. I had glued it back together, told her that objects hold love. That's why we keep them. That same teacup was in the appraiser's hands right now, tagged with a yellow sticker. As 047. Claire. I heard the pleading in my own voice. Please. She examined her fingernails. Dad, it's just stuff. You're being dramatic. Just stuff. 50 years of memories. Just stuff. Derek checked his watch. Look, we don't have time for this. Just finish the inventory. He nodded at the lead appraiser, who hesitated for a moment, then resumed his work. The other men followed suit, moving through the house like efficient insects, tagging and photographing and cataloging. 4 hours later, they were done. The lead appraiser handed Derek a clipboard thick with paperwork. 127 items tagged. Total estimated value, $89,000. He paused. Not including the house, of course. Derek signed the inventory with a flourish, his Mont Blanc pen glinting in the afternoon light. Excellent. Schedule the auction for next month. Vanessa was already heading for the door. She stopped, turned back and looked at me with that smile, the one that never reached her eyes. Oh, and Dad, that painting. She pointed at the coastal scene above the mantel. "We're taking it when we leave today. Consider it an early withdrawal." She laughed at her own joke. Derek joined in. The appraiser lifted the painting off the wall, wrapped it in brown paper, carried it to the van. I watched from the window as they loaded it alongside carts of bubble-wrapped memories. Vanessa climbed into the Mercedes. Derek started the engine. They drove away, leaving behind yellow stickers, empty spaces, and a white rectangle on the wall where my anniversary painting used to hang. After they left, I stood in the living room, surrounded by the aftermath. Yellow tags everywhere like wounds that wouldn't heal. Gaps on shelves where objects had already been removed for early evaluation. But I walked to the lamp in the corner, the one with the hidden camera Price had told me about, and looked directly into it. Everything had been recorded. Every word, every tag, every theft. My phone buzzed. "Gloria. Saw the vans. Are you okay?" I typed back. "Day 15. 15 more to go." Her response came immediately. "They're building your case for you." I looked at the white rectangle where Margaret's painting had hung, at the yellow stickers covering everything I loved. "I know," I wrote back. "I know." They had just added another chapter to their own indictment, and they didn't even realize they were writing it. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, 5 days after they took the painting. "Dad." Derek's voice was unusually warm, almost friendly. "We've been thinking. We haven't handled this well." I gripped the receiver, waiting for the trap. "Vanessa wants to apologize. We all do. Can we come over tonight, family dinner? Clear the air." I should have known. In 20 years, Derek had never apologized for anything. But some part of me, the part that still remembered teaching him to ride a bicycle, still remembered his small hand gripping mine, wanted to believe. "What time?" 7. "We'll bring wine." I called Gloria after I hung up, told her about the invitation, the unusual warmth in Derek's voice, the promise of reconciliation. "Be careful." Her voice was sharp. "Wolves don't become sheep overnight." "I know. But what if they're changing? What if Margaret was wrong about them?" Silence on the line. Then, "Keep your phone on. I'll be watching from my window." I agreed. But as I hung up, I couldn't silence the hope. Maybe the threat of losing everything had scared them straight. Maybe they had looked in the mirror and didn't like what they saw. Maybe I would still have a family after this was over. I spent the afternoon cooking. Margaret's recipe for pot roast, the one she had requested every Sunday for 40 years. I set the table with the china that hadn't been auctioned yet, lit candles, even put on a clean shirt and pressed slacks. I wanted this to be real. I wanted it so badly I could taste it. They arrived at 7 sharp. Derek, Vanessa, Claire, all 3 of them. But they weren't alone. A 4th person stood behind them. A woman in her 50s, gray blazer leather bag, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't recognize her. "Dad," Vanessa's voice was sugar-coated. "This is Dr. Patricia Holloway. She's a family consultant. We thought it would be good to have a neutral party here tonight." My stomach dropped. Dr. Holloway extended her hand. Her grip was firm, clinical. "Mr. Ward, I specialize in geriatric wellness assessments. Your family has expressed some concerns about your well-being." They hadn't come to apologize. They had come to have me declared incompetent. I stepped back to let them in, mind racing. If they could prove I was mentally unfit, they could override the will. Take control of my finances. Put me away without waiting for the 6 months to expire. The pot roast sat untouched on the table. The candles I had lit with such hope flickered uselessly. This wasn't a peace offering. It was an ambush. They arranged themselves in the living room. Derek in my armchair, Vanessa perched on the sofa arm, Claire in the corner, scrolling her phone. Dr. Holloway sat across from me, clipboard balanced on her knee, pen poised. "Mr. Ward, I want you to know this is just a conversation." Her voice was soothing, practiced. Nothing formal. Your family is simply concerned about some behaviors they've noticed recently. What behaviors? Resistance to reasonable suggestions, confusion about legal matters, some erratic decision-making. I looked at Derek. His face was blank, unreadable. Your family mentioned you've refused to sign some routine paperwork. Can you tell me about that? The inheritance waivers, the power of attorney documents. They were using my refusal to protect myself as evidence of mental decline. The paperwork wasn't routine, I said carefully. It would have signed away my legal rights. Dr. Holloway made a note. And do you feel that people are trying to take advantage of you? The question was a trap. Say yes, and I sounded paranoid. Say no, and I was contradicting myself. I feel that my children have made their intentions clear, I said. That's not paranoia, that's observation. Vanessa leaned forward. See, this is what we mean. He gets so defensive, so suspicious. Last week, Claire added without looking up from her phone. He couldn't remember where he put his keys. I was grieving, I said. My wife had just died. He's been talking to himself, Derek offered. I've heard him through the windows. I was on the phone with a friend. Claire snorted. What friend? You don't have friends. The cruelty was so casual, so effortless, as if dismissing my entire existence required no more thought than commenting on the weather. Dr. Holloway continued asking questions. What day was it? Who was the current president? Could I count backward from 100 by sevens? I answered each one correctly, watching her expression remain carefully neutral. Then she shifted tactics. Mr. Ward, your family is considering some living arrangement changes for you. How do you feel about that? You mean the nursing home they booked before my wife was even dead? Derek's jaw tightened. Vanessa's smile flickered. I'm 70 years old. I continued, my voice steady. I've lived in this house for 40 years. I've raised 2 children, managed a household, and supported a business empire from behind the scenes. I am not confused. I am not incompetent. I simply refuse to be pushed out of my own home by people who see me as an obstacle to their inheritance. The room went silent. Then Derek exploded. This is exactly what we're talking about. He was on his feet, face red, finger jabbing toward me. You're paranoid delusional. You think everyone's against you. Derek. Vanessa tried to intervene. No, he shook her off. We've been patient. We've tried to help. And he throws it back in our faces. He was pacing now, the carefully constructed businessman, unraveling with every step. Just like you did with Mom, always the victim, always the martyr. You made her life miserable with your weakness. Derek, that's enough. Even Dr. Holloway looked uncomfortable. But Derek wasn't finished. He leaned across the coffee table close enough that I could see the veins pulsing in his temples. You want to know the truth, Dad? You're nothing. You were nothing when Mom was alive, and you're nothing now. Without her, you're just a sad old man living in a house he doesn't deserve. His voice dropped to a hiss. You should be grateful we're even bothering with you. The words hung in the air like poison. Dr. Holloway closed her notebook slowly. Vanessa's face had gone pale. Even she knew Derek had crossed a line. Claire stared at the floor. I stood up. My legs were steady. My voice was calm. I think this evaluation is over. Dad, Derek started. Please leave my house. I walked to the front door and opened it. The night air was cool, clean, nothing like the atmosphere inside. Derek grabbed his coat. Vanessa gathered her things. Dr. Holloway lingered for a moment, then approached me quietly. Mr. Ward, for what it's worth, I don't think you need an evaluation. I think you need better family. She pressed a business card into my hand. Call me if you need a professional opinion. A real one. She left. Derek and Vanessa followed Claire, trailing behind. The door closed. The house fell silent. I stood in the living room, surrounded by cold pot roast and guttered candles, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not devastation, not defeat. Clarity. A knock at the back door. I opened it to find Gloria, phone in hand, face grim. "I got everything," she said. "I was at the kitchen window. The audio is clear." She held up the phone, Derek's voice unmistakable. "You're nothing." "That's not just disrespect, Elias." Gloria's eyes were hard. "That's documented verbal abuse." I looked at the phone, at the evidence of my son's contempt preserved in digital clarity. "How many days left?" 10. "Then we wait." Gloria nodded. She made tea. We sat in the kitchen, not speaking, listening to the silence of a house that had witnessed too much. 10 days. They had 10 days left, and they had just given me everything I needed. 3 days of silence followed Derek's outburst. No phone calls, no visits, no Mercedes in the driveway. I began to wonder if they had retreated, if the psychiatric ambush had been their final move. I should have known better. Silence from predators doesn't mean they've given up. It means they're planning. Day 23, 7 days remaining. I was watering the few plants that hadn't been tagged for auction when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Vanessa's black Lexus parked at the curb. She was alone this time. No Derek, no appraisers, no hired psychiatrists, just her, and a thick manila folder under her arm. She let herself in with Derek's key before I could reach the door. The invasion had become so routine that she didn't even pretend to wait for permission anymore. "We need to talk." She walked past me into the kitchen, Margaret's kitchen, and sat down at the table like she owned it. "Privately." I remained standing. "About what?" She opened the manila folder with manicured precision, spreading documents across the table like a poker dealer laying out cards. 3 stacks, 3 different colored paper clips, 3 different ways to end my life as I knew it. "These need your signature." I picked up the first document. General Durable Power of Attorney. 12 pages of dense legal text, but the meaning was clear enough. If I signed, Derek would have complete control over my finances. Every bank account, every asset, every decision. "Just a precaution," Vanessa said, her voice honeyed. "In case you become incapacitated." I moved to the second stack. Healthcare Directive and Medical Power of Attorney. This one named Derek as my medical decision-maker, with authority to approve treatments, refuse care, and buried in paragraph 7, authorize involuntary psychiatric commitment when deemed necessary. "If something happens," she explained, "we need to be able to make decisions quickly. You understand?" The third document was the thinnest, but I recognized it immediately. Voluntary Waiver of Contestation Rights. A single page that would legally prevent me from ever challenging any aspect of Margaret's estate. This was the real target. Everything else was window dressing. "It's just paperwork, Dad." Vanessa slid an expensive pen across the table, Montblanc, Derek's favorite brand. "Sign these, and we can all move on. Put this ugliness behind us." I read every page, every clause, every carefully buried provision. Price's words echoed in my mind. "Do not sign anything. Nothing." "This document," I said, holding up the waiver, "would remove my right to contest the will." "It's standard language. Foreclosure. Why would I need to sign away rights I'm not planning to exercise?" Her smile tightened. "Because it makes things cleaner. Simpler. For whom? For everyone." I set down the papers, pushed them back across the table toward her. "I'm not signing these." Something shifted in Vanessa's face. The sweetness evaporated like morning dew in harsh sunlight. What remained underneath was cold, hard reptilian. "You're making a mistake, Elias." First time she had used my first name. The deliberate disrespect landed exactly as she intended. "We've been patient," she continued. "We've been reasonable. But patience has limits." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check." She stood gathering the unsigned documents. "Derek wanted to handle this differently. I convinced him to try the nice way first." She leaned close. I could smell her perfume, something expensive, aggressive. This was the nice way. You don't want to see the other way. She pulled out her phone and dialed. The conversation was brief. He's not signing. Proceed. She hung up without waiting for a response. Then she smiled at me, the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse before the killing blow. I warned you. 20 minutes later, Derek arrived with a locksmith. The man wore coveralls and carried a heavy toolbox. He didn't make eye contact with me, just followed Derek upstairs while I trailed behind, demanding explanations I knew wouldn't come. They stopped at the master bedroom door. My bedroom. The room where Margaret and I had slept for 40 years. Where I had held her hand through nightmares and whispered promises in the dark. Derek stepped aside and the locksmith began working on the door handle. What are you doing? Securing valuable property. Derek's voice was flat, businesslike. Mom's jewelry is still in there. Her personal items, estate property. This is my bedroom. Until the inventory is complete, this room needs to be protected. He paused, letting the implication settle. From theft. The locksmith finished his work. A new deadbolt gleamed silver against the old wood. Derek tested the key, nodded with satisfaction, and dropped it in his pocket. You can sleep in the guest room, he said. Or the couch. But this room is off limits now. I tried to push past him. He blocked me chest to chest with my own son, close enough to see the emptiness in his eyes. Move. No. We stood there for a long moment. Father and son. Strangers. He didn't blink. They locked the study next, where Margaret's documents were kept. Then the basement, where the remaining family heirlooms were stored. 3 rooms, 3 locks. 3 pieces of my life sealed away. Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs, watching the locksmith work with obvious satisfaction. The guest room bed is uncomfortable, I know, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But there's a lovely room waiting for you at Sunset Pines. Single occupancy, garden view. She tilted her head, pretending to think. Maybe you'll be more reasonable after a bad night's sleep. We'll be back tomorrow with the paperwork. They left. The locksmith packed his tools and followed. The front door closed with a sound of finality. I climbed the stairs, tried the master bedroom door out of desperate hope. The new lock held firm. I pressed my palm against the wood, the same door I had hung myself 32 years ago when Derek was just a baby, sleeping in the nursery down the hall. The guest room was empty. Not just empty, stripped. The mattress was gone. The bedding was gone. Only the bare metal frame remained like a skeleton. I checked the living room. The sofa cushions had been removed too. Not careless, not accidental, deliberate, calculated, cruelty with a purpose. I stood in my own house with nowhere to sleep. The garage. The thought came unbidden. There was an old camping cot out there from the summers when Derek was young and we used to pretend we were adventurers in the backyard. I had kept it all these years, along with the sleeping bags and the lanterns and the memories of a son who once looked at me with love instead of contempt. The cot was dusty, the canvas spotted with mildew. The springs were broken, sagging in the middle. But it was horizontal. It was something. I lay down on that cot in my own garage, surrounded by lawn equipment and paint cans, and stared at the ceiling. Above me, through the floorboards, was the bedroom where I had slept next to Margaret for 4 decades. My phone buzzed. Gloria. I saw the locksmith. What happened? I told her. All of it. The documents, the threats, the locks, the stripped guest room, the garage, silence on the line. Then, Elias, this is criminal, actual criminal behavior, unlawful restriction of access, elder abuse, coercion. I know. This ends now. I'm calling the police. No. The word came out stronger than I expected. It ends in 7 days. 7 days they locked you out of your own bedroom. And the cameras recorded everything. The locksmith, the threats, the documents they tried to force me to sign. I could hear Gloria breathing, processing. "This isn't just a behavior clause violation anymore," she finally said. "This is a criminal case." "I know. And in 7 days, they'll learn that." I hung up and lay back on the broken cot. The concrete floor was cold. The air smelled of motor oil and old paint. Somewhere above me, new locks glinted on doors that used to be mine. 7 days. I had slept in worse places. In the Army, I once spent 3 weeks in a foxhole that flooded every night. A garage for 7 nights was nothing. But they would remember those 7 nights for the rest of their lives. I closed my eyes and waited for morning. Day 30. I woke on the garage cot for the 7th time. My body ached in places I had forgotten existed. My back had seized during the night, and it took me 3 attempts to sit upright. My shoulders were stiff. My hips throbbed. The concrete floor had leached cold into my bones despite the threadbare sleeping bag I had found buried in a storage box. But I was still here, still standing, still breathing. I caught my reflection in the small bathroom mirror attached to the garage wall, the one I used for shaving when I worked on weekend projects. The man staring back had aged a decade in a week, dark circles under his eyes, gray stubble on his chin, wrinkled clothes that hadn't been properly washed. But his eyes? Something different lived there now. Not defeat, not resignation, steel. 7 nights sleeping in my own garage while my children lived in heated homes with soft beds. 7 nights eating cold food from the kitchen when they weren't watching. 7 nights documenting every indignity, every cruelty, every violation. Today it ended. I checked the mail at 8 o'clock, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Among the bills and advertisements was an envelope I had been expecting. Heavy paper. Official letterhead. Price and Associates. RE Estate of Margaret Ellen Ward Supplementary Reading. You are hereby summoned to attend a mandatory reading of additional testamentary documents. Date today, 2:00 p.m. Location Price and Associates, 14th floor. All beneficiaries required to attend. I read it twice. The language was perfect, formal enough to sound routine, urgent enough to demand compliance. Derek and Vanessa would read this and think it was the final paperwork. The last step before they could sell the house and deposit me at Sunset Pines. They would come expecting to collect. They would leave with nothing. I needed to prepare, not just mentally, physically. I refused to walk into that conference room looking like a man they had broken. Gloria arrived at 9 with a garment bag over her arm. "I had a feeling you'd need this." She unzipped it to reveal a charcoal gray suit, pressed white shirt, burgundy tie. Classic, dignified. "My husband's," she explained. "He passed 3 years ago. Same build as you. He would have wanted it used for something important." I held the fabric between my fingers. Fine wool, well made. The kind of suit a man wears when he wants to be taken seriously. "Thank you, Gloria." "Don't thank me yet. Go shower. Actually shower. You smell like motor oil and defeat." For the first time in days, I laughed. The hot water was a revelation. I had been using the garage sink for a week, splashing cold water on my face, never feeling truly clean. Now I stood under the shower in the main bathroom, still accessible. They hadn't locked that and let the heat work through muscles that had forgotten what comfort felt like. I shaved carefully, methodically, watched the gray stubble fall away and a cleaner face emerge. Not young, not strong, but present, accounted for. The suit fit perfectly. Gloria adjusted the tie while I stood in her living room, feeling like a man being prepared for battle. "Whatever happens in that room," she said, "remember who you are, not who they said you were, who Margaret knew you were." And who was that? The man who held everything together. She smoothed the lapels of the jacket. The man she trusted with her legacy. She pressed something into my hand, a USB drive. Backup copies, all the recordings, the videos from the house cameras, my phone footage, everything. "Price has the originals, but I want you to have insurance." I pocketed the drive. In case they try anything. In case they try anything. The memory came without warning. 3 months ago. The hospital room where Margaret spent her final days. Machines beeping their slow countdown. Her hand in mine so thin, I could feel every bone, every vein. She had been drifting in and out of consciousness for days. The doctor said it was the medication. The body shutting down. I had accepted that I might never hear her voice clearly again. Then her eyes opened. Focused. Sharp. Elias! Her grip tightened with surprising strength. Listen to me. I leaned closer, heartbreaking. I wasted so much time, she whispered. Building things that don't matter. I should have built us instead. Margaret, but I'm going to fix what I can. Her eyes were fierce, determined. They're going to come for everything after I'm gone. Let them. I don't understand. Give them 30 days. 30 days to show who they are. She pulled me closer. Then take back what's yours. Margaret, please. You need to rest. Promise me. Her voice cracked. Promise me you won't give up. Promise me you'll finally fight for yourself. I promise. She smiled then. The first real smile I had seen in weeks. Her eyes closed, her grip relaxed. By morning she was gone. Now standing in Gloria's living room, in a borrowed suit I finally understood. Every word, every instruction, every breath she had spent on those final moments. She had given me a weapon, and my children had spent 30 days loading it themselves. Gloria drove me downtown, the same route to Price & Associates I had traveled twice before. The first time as a grieving husband. The second time as a man learning the truth. Now as something else entirely, a man with a purpose. The city passed by the window. Buildings Margaret had developed, streets we had walked together, a lifetime of memories compressed into concrete and glass. She built an empire here, I said quietly, and today I inherit it, or watch it burn. It won't burn. Gloria's voice was certain. She made sure of that. We pulled into the parking garage at 1:30. Derek's Mercedes was already there, gleaming black in the fluorescent light, Vanessa's Lexus beside it. They had arrived early, eager, confident. They had no idea what was waiting for them. I stepped out of Gloria's Toyota and straightened my tie. The borrowed suit felt like armor now. Margaret's letter was in my breast pocket where it had lived since the night I opened it. Ready? Gloria asked. I looked at the glass doors leading into the building. Beyond them, 14 floors up, my children were sitting in a conference room, probably already celebrating. Probably already planning how to spend the money. I've been ready for 44 years, I said. I just didn't know it. We walked toward the entrance. The afternoon sun caught the building's mirrored surface and threw light back at us, warm, golden, almost like a blessing. 30 days ago, I buried my wife. Today I would bury the lie that I was nothing. Today, the silence would finally speak. The conference room looked exactly as I remembered it. Same mahogany table, same leather chairs, same floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city skyline. But when I walked through the door at exactly 2:00 p.m., everything had changed. Derek sat at the head of the table, legs spread wide, claiming territory that wasn't his. Vanessa perched beside him, scrolling through her phone with performative boredom. Claire occupied the corner as far from everyone as possible, her expression unreadable. None of them looked up when I entered. Derek was the first to speak. Finally, let's wrap this up, Mr. Price. He slid a folder across the table, the same documents from 3 days ago, the ones I had refused to sign. We also have some paperwork for Dad to sign, to finalize everything. Raymond Price stood at the head of the room, hands clasped behind his back. His expression was neutral, professional. Only someone who knew what was coming would notice the slight tightness around his jaw. Before any signing, he said, there are additional documents to review, documents that must be read before any further proceedings. Derek waved his hand dismissively. Fine, let's hear it. Price walked to his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope. I recognized it immediately, the same envelope he had shown me 18 days ago. The second page, the trap. This is a supplementary clause to the last will and testament of Margaret Ellen Ward. His voice was measured, deliberate. Registered before a notary on March 3rd of this year with specific instructions for conditional revelation. Derek shifted in his seat. Conditional, what does that mean? It means this page could only be read after 30 days had passed since Mrs. Ward's death. Price paused. And only if certain conditions were met. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Derek's face. Vanessa lowered her phone. Claire looked up from her corner. What conditions? Vanessa's voice had lost some of its edge. Price broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper was unnaturally loud in the silent room. I will read the clause in its entirety. He cleared his throat and began. Each word landed like a hammer blow. Additional clause to the last will and testament of Margaret Ellen Ward. I establish the following behavioral contingency. If within 30 days following my death, my children, Derek Ward and/or Claire Ward, demonstrate behavior toward my husband Elias that constitutes abuse, coercion, disrespect, or any attempt to deprive him of his dignity or legal rights. Price looked up, meeting Derek's eyes. The inheritance designated to them shall be revoked in its entirety and transferred completely to Elias Ward. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Then Derek laughed. A short, sharp bark of disbelief. This is a joke. He stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled. You can't just change a will based on behavior. That's not how inheritance works. Connecticut law clearly upholds behavioral contingency clauses, Price replied calmly. Your mother was very thorough. This is insane. Vanessa's voice was rising. She was dying. She wasn't in her right mind. We'll have this thrown out in an hour. Mrs. Ward underwent a cognitive evaluation 2 days before signing this document. She was declared fully competent by 2 independent physicians. The records are available for your review. Derek was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. Even if the clause is legal, you can't prove anything. It's our word against his. Price walked to the conference table and opened his laptop. The clause requires documented proof of triggering behavior. Your mother anticipated this need. He pressed a key. She installed surveillance cameras 3 months before her death. The screen flickered to life. The first video showed St. Catherine's Church, the funeral. Vanessa's voice crystal clear. Get out of the front row. You don't belong there anymore. Derek's face drained of color. The second video. The first will reading. Derek's laughter exploding through speakers. $1,000, that doesn't even cover Vanessa's spa budget. Vanessa's giggle. I guess we know what 44 years of service is worth. Claire's smirk in the background. The third video. My living room. Vanessa stepping close to me, arms crossed. You're not even her real family. You were just the help. The word echoed off the conference room walls. Vanessa pressed her hand against her mouth. The fourth video. The psychiatric ambush. Derek screaming, veins visible in his temples. You're nothing. You were nothing when Mom was alive, and you're nothing now. His voice shook the laptop speakers. You should be grateful we're even bothering with you. Derek backed away from the screen like it was radioactive. The fifth video. The locksmith. Derek's voice. Securing valuable property. Me trying to enter my own bedroom and being blocked. The garage, the camping cot. 7 nights of footage, time-stamped and irrefutable. Price closed the laptop. I have 47 documented incidents over 30 days. Verbal abuse, psychological manipulation, financial coercion, physical displacement, forced changes in living arrangements. Attempts to have Mr. Ward declared mentally incompetent. He straightened his glasses. The behavioral clause has been triggered. Multiple times. No. Derek's voice cracked. No, this isn't happening. Price continued as if he hadn't spoken. As executor of this estate with the authority granted by the deceased, I hereby declare the behavioral contingency clause activated. He read from the document in his hands. The inheritance of Derek Ward, $8 million, is revoked. The inheritance of Claire Ward, $4 million, is revoked. The entirety of Margaret Ellen Ward's estate, including all commercial properties, business holdings, investment portfolios, and personal assets totaling approximately $12 million, is hereby transferred to Elias Ward. Vanessa made a sound like a wounded animal. Derek Ward shall receive the sum of $1,000. Claire Ward shall receive the sum of $1,000. Price looked up. The same respect they showed their father. Derek swept his arm across the table, sending papers flying. This is fraud. This is entrapment. She set us up. She manipulated us. You're welcome to contest the will in court. Price's voice remained level. But every action documented was voluntary. Every word recorded was yours. You weren't entrapped, Mr. Ward. You were observed, being exactly who you chose to be. Vanessa turned on Derek, mascara already running. This is your fault. I told you to be careful. I told you not to push so hard. You were right there with me, Derek shouted back. Every step. Because I thought you knew what you were doing. Claire hadn't moved. She sat in her corner, tears streaming silently down her face, staring at nothing. I stood. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me, the invisible man finally demanding to be seen. For 44 years. I said I was invisible. I cooked. I cleaned. I raised you. I held this family together while your mother built her empire. And you looked right through me. My voice was steady, stronger than I had ever heard it. I accepted it. Because I loved your mother. Because I loved you. I looked at Derek, at Claire, at the shattered remains of a family I had given everything to protect. But you didn't just ignore me. You tried to erase me. You mocked me at my wife's funeral. You called me the help. You locked me out of my own bedroom. You made me sleep in a garage. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. Your mother saw who you became, and she gave you 30 days to prove her wrong. I straightened my borrowed tie. You didn't. I walked toward the door. This isn't revenge. This is consequence. I didn't take anything from you. You gave it away. Every insult, every cruelty, every choice. I opened the door. You built this yourselves. I stepped into the hallway. Behind me, I heard Derek shouting, Vanessa screaming, Claire sobbing. But for the first time in 44 years, their noise didn't touch me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was free. I made it 3 steps down the hallway before I heard him running. Dad! Dad! Wait! Derek's voice echoed off the marble floors, stripped of all its usual arrogance. I kept walking toward the elevator, my borrowed shoes clicking steadily against the stone. He caught up to me near the receptionist's desk, grabbing my arm with a grip that was desperate rather than aggressive. First time he had touched me without hostility since Margaret's funeral. Please. His face was red sweating tie yanked loose. The polished executive had vanished entirely. Just listen to me. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I stopped, turned slowly, looked at the man I had raised, the boy I had loved, the stranger he had become. I'm listening. This is crazy. He was breathing hard words, tumbling out without his usual calculated precision. You can't do this. We can work something out. Split it, 50-50, 60-40, whatever you want. What I want? I'm your son, Dad. He said it like it was a trump card. Your blood. Your family. That has to mean something. I let the word hang in the air between us. Blood didn't stop you from calling me nothing. He flinched, actually flinched like I had struck him. I didn't mean that. I was stressed, grieving, Mom had just died and I wasn't handling it well. Your mother died 30 days ago. You had 30 days to handle it differently. I know I messed up. His eyes were wet now, real tears or manufactured ones, I couldn't tell anymore. But you can't punish me for grief. You can't take everything because I had a breakdown. Behind him, the conference room door burst open. Vanessa stormed into the hallway, her designer heels cracking against the marble like gunshots. Her carefully constructed appearance had collapsed mascara streaking her cheeks, hair disheveled, eyes wild with fury. "This isn't over." She jabbed a finger at the air. "We're contesting everything. Our lawyers will tear that clause apart piece by piece." Raymond Price appeared in the doorway behind her, calm and unruffled. "You're welcome to try, Mrs. Ward. I look forward to seeing you in court." Vanessa's face contorted. For a moment I thought she might actually attack him. Then she turned on Derek instead. "This is your fault." She shoved his chest with both hands. "All of it. Everything. Vanessa, I told you to be smart. I told you not to push so hard." Her voice had risen to a shriek. "But no, you had to have your little power trip." "You're nothing, Dad. Whose idea was that?" "You were right there with me," Derek shouted back. "You wanted him out just as much as I did. I wanted him in a nursing home. You wanted to humiliate him. The locked doors, the garage, making him sleep on a camping cot like some homeless person." She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "And you didn't even check for cameras. Your own mother outsmarted you from beyond the grave." Derek's face went scarlet. "Don't you dare blame this on me. The psychiatric evaluation was your idea. Because I thought you knew what you were doing. I thought you had it under control." They were screaming at each other now, oblivious to the receptionist's horrified stare, oblivious to Price watching from the doorway, oblivious to me standing 6 feet away, witnessing the implosion of their marriage in real time. Vanessa stopped mid-sentence. Something shifted in her expression. Calculation replacing fury strategy, emerging from chaos. She reached down and pulled the diamond ring from her finger. "You know what?" Her voice was suddenly cold. "I married a CEO's son, a future millionaire, a man who was going to inherit an empire." She threw the ring at Derek's chest. It bounced off his sternum and clattered to the marble floor. "Now I'm married to a man with $1,000 to his name. I didn't sign up for this." Derek stared at the ring on the ground. "Vanessa, wait. I'm calling my lawyer." She was already walking toward the elevator. A different kind of lawyer. Divorce papers by Monday. She stabbed the elevator button. "And I'm keeping the Lexus. It's in my name." The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, pressed a button. The doors closed. She never looked back. Derek stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the spot where his wife had disappeared. The diamond ring glinted on the marble between us. His shoulders began to shake. "Dad?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Please." Movement behind me. Claire had finally emerged from the conference room. She walked slowly, hesitantly, her face swollen from crying. She stopped a few feet away, unable or unwilling to come closer. We stood there, father, son, daughter, in the wreckage of everything we used to be. "Claire." I spoke her name gently, gave her the space to say something, anything. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. I didn't..." She couldn't finish the sentence. I waited, hoping for something real, a genuine apology, a moment of actual connection. "I didn't know it would go this far, Shahan," she finally managed. I thought we deserved..." She trailed off. Couldn't bring herself to complete the thought. "I thought we deserved more than you." But that's what she meant. Even now, standing in the ruins, she was mourning the money, not the relationship. "You were my little girl, Claire." I heard the sadness in my own voice. "I would have given you anything. You just had to ask. Her eyes met mine for the first time in months. But you didn't ask. You took. And you watched them take from me. I shook my head slowly and said nothing. Silence has a price too. She started crying again, softly, helplessly. If you ever want to have a real conversation, I said, not about money, about us, you know where I live. The door will be open. I paused. But you have to walk through it yourself. She nodded. The tears kept falling. She didn't say sorry. Maybe she couldn't. Not yet. Derek had sunk to his knees, retrieving the wedding ring from the floor. He clutched it in his fist like a man holding on to the last piece of a life that had just shattered. What am I supposed to do now? His voice cracked. I have nothing. No wife. No inheritance. No company. You have $1,000, I said quietly, and yourself. That's more than you left me. I turned and walked toward the elevator. My finger pressed the down button. The machinery hummed somewhere below. Dad? Derek's voice followed me. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I didn't turn around. I know you are. But being sorry now doesn't undo what you chose to do when you thought there were no consequences. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. The doors slid open. Maybe someday we can talk about it. Maybe someday you'll understand why I had to let this happen. I stepped inside. But today is not that day. I pressed the button for the lobby, watched the doors begin to close. Through the narrowing gap, I saw Derek still kneeling on the floor. Claire standing apart, arms wrapped around herself. Two people who had been given everything and thrown it away for more. The doors sealed shut. The elevator descended. 14 floors to process what had just happened. $12 million now mine. A family destroyed. A marriage ended. Justice served. So why did it feel hollow I had won? Margaret had made sure of it. But winning against your own children doesn't feel like victory. It feels like surviving a fire you didn't start. Everything is ash, but you're still standing. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Gloria was waiting by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. She saw my face and knew everything without asking. She took my arm, didn't speak, just walked beside me through the lobby, past the security desk, into the parking garage. We passed Derek's Mercedes, he wouldn't be driving it much longer. Past Vanessa's Lexus, her divorce settlement. Climbed into Gloria's old Toyota, the only honest vehicle in the lot. How do you feel? She finally asked as she started the engine. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Old, tired, free. She nodded slowly. That's 3 more things than you felt a month ago. Yeah. I leaned back against the headrest. I suppose it is. Through the glass doors of the building, I saw Derek stumble out onto the sidewalk. He stood there alone, looking at nothing, lost in a future that had just collapsed around him. Part of me wanted to go back, to hold him, to tell him it would be okay. But it wouldn't be okay. Not for a long time. And some lessons can only be learned alone. Gloria drove us home. To the house that was finally legally, completely mine. Margaret's last gift. A future I didn't ask for. But one I was ready to live. 6 months later, I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows. My bedroom, the master suite where Margaret and I had slept for 40 years. The locks were gone now, removed the day after the will reading, along with every trace of the invasion my children had orchestrated. The walls had been repainted a soft blue, a color I had always wanted, but never suggested, because Margaret preferred cream. Small changes. My changes. For the first time in 44 years, the choices were mine. I lay there for a moment, listening to the silence. Not the oppressive silence of grief, but something gentler. Peaceful. The silence of a house that had finally stopped holding its breath. The grandfather clock still ticked in the hallway. I wound it every Sunday just as my father had done, just as I would continue to do until my hands could no longer manage the key. Some things endure, some things should. Above the fireplace, the anniversary painting had returned to its rightful place. I had found it at the auction house 3 weeks after the will reading bought it back for twice what it was worth. The auctioneer had looked at me strangely when I wrote the check with trembling hands. He didn't understand. Some things cannot be measured in dollars. Gloria came for breakfast every Thursday now. Our weekly tradition, she would arrive at 8 with fresh pastries from the Vietnamese bakery on Main Street, and we would sit in the kitchen drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing. This morning she brought banh mi and a copy of the Hartford Courant. "You made the business section again." She slid the paper across the table. The Margaret Ward Foundation just funded its 50th case. I looked at the headline. Local foundation provides legal aid to elderly abuse victims. Below it, a photograph of a woman I didn't recognize smiling outside a courthouse. The caption read, "Martha Chen, 74, successfully retained her home after foundation-funded attorneys proved financial coercion by family members." 50 cases. 50 people like me, people who had been invisible, who had been told they were nothing, who had been pushed aside by the very people they had sacrificed everything to raise. I had donated $8 million to the foundation, the majority of the inheritance. Margaret's money used to protect people. Margaret never knew guided by a mission Margaret would have appreciated. Efficiency, turning guilt into good. "She would have liked this," Gloria said, reading my thoughts. The irony of it all. Her name on the foundation, her money funding it, but your vision making it real. She always did appreciate a good strategy. I kept enough to live comfortably. The house, a modest investment account. Enough to never worry, but not enough to become what my children had become. Money changes people. I had seen it happen. I had no desire to let it happen to me. Gloria finished her tea and stood to leave. At the door she paused. "Have you heard from them?" The question she asked every week. The answer was usually the same. "Claire sent a birthday card last month, called on Christmas." I shrugged. Small steps. Claire had moved to Vermont after the will reading. Took a job at a nonprofit, something involving literacy programs for underprivileged children. The salary was modest. The work was meaningful. She seemed different in our occasional conversations, quieter, more thoughtful, less entitled. We didn't talk about the inheritance. We talked about books, whether her small apartment with a view of the mountains. Surface conversations, but real ones. The door I had left open, she was slowly walking through. Forgiveness was still a long way off, but the road existed now. That was something. And Derek. I was quiet for a moment. He came to see me 3 months ago. Gloria's eyebrows rose. "You didn't mention that." I wasn't sure what to make of it. It had been a Sunday afternoon. The doorbell had rung, and I had opened it to find my son standing on the porch. No suit, no tie. Just jeans and a worn sweater, looking older than his 42 years, looking like a man who had been through something that had broken and rebuilt him. "Can I come in?" We sat in the kitchen. The same kitchen where Vanessa had spread her documents, where Derek had threatened me, where so much damage had been done. I made coffee. He didn't touch his cup. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said finally. "She says I have a lot to unpack." "That's good. I'm trying to understand who I became and why." He stared at his hands. "The things I said to you, the things I did. I watch those videos in my head every night, and I don't recognize the person I'm looking at." I waited. Let him speak. "I'm not here to fix things. I know I can't." His voice cracked. "I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What we did. What I did. It wasn't grief. It wasn't stress. It was greed and cruelty. And you didn't deserve any of it." The words hung in the air between us. An apology 44 years in the making. Thank you for saying that. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good. I said it gently, without malice. Because I don't know if I can. Not yet. He nodded, accepted it. But I'm glad you came, I added, and the door will stay open. If you want to try again. He left after an hour. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. But something had shifted. A crack in the wall between us, letting in a sliver of light. I told Gloria about the visit, now standing in my doorway, the spring morning, bright around us. Do you think he's changed? She asked. I think he's trying to. Whether he succeeds? I shrugged. That's his choice, not mine. And Vanessa, remarried, some developer in Florida. I almost smiled. Some people never change. They just find new stages. Gloria laughed. Margaret would have had something sharp to say about that. Margaret would have had something sharp to say about everything. After Gloria left, I drove to the cemetery. The headstone was simple, elegant gray granite, with her name and dates carved in clean letters. I had brought yellow daisies, as I did every month, her favorite flower. The one thing I knew about her, that her children never bothered to learn. I stood there for a long time, letting the spring breeze wash over me. You always were 3 steps ahead of everyone, I said finally. Even me. A bird sang somewhere in the trees. The sun was warm on my face. I spent 44 years thinking I was invisible to you. Turns out you saw everything. You just didn't know how to say it. I laid the flowers against the stone. So you said it the only way you knew how. With a plan, a strategy, a last deal. I touched the granite, felt its coolness against my palm. Thank you for giving me what I never gave myself. A voice, a choice, a future. I stepped back. I'm living it now, the best I can. I hope that's enough. The wind rustled through the daisies. I chose to believe it was her answer. If you've made it this far, maybe you see yourself in this story. Maybe you're the one who's been invisible. The one who cooks, cleans, holds everything together, while others take the credit. The one who gives and gives until there's nothing left. The one who wonders if anyone even notices. I want you to know I see you. Your sacrifice matters. Your presence matters. You matter. Even if no one says it. Even if no one shows it. You are not just anything. You are the foundation, and foundations don't crumble quietly. Silence is not weakness, but it's not protection either. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is speak. To say, enough. To claim the dignity that was always yours. You don't need permission. You don't need a plan. You just need to decide that you deserve better. Because you do. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or someone you were, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me, have you ever felt invisible? How did you find your voice? Your story matters too. If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. We share stories like this every week, stories of quiet strength, unexpected justice, and people who refuse to disappear. Hit that notification bell so you never miss one. And remember what it took me 70 years to learn. Dignity isn't given. It's claimed. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned. And silence only speaks when you finally decide to break it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.